with them, supporting them in that. They've done a number of good things, I think, in joint marketing and pulling companies together and telling the rest of the world about what's going on here. They've done some things at various shows and things like that. And your local air show that you have here. And the last one you had an event there that I've really held out to the rest of the state as a model. You had an Aero Expo where the Aerospace Alliance had your companies there using that air show not just as an entertainment event, but as a business development event. If you think about the big air shows you hear about, the Paris Air Show, Farnborough Air Show, the Dubai Air Shows. Well, they're air shows, but they're huge business events. Depends on if you're a business person, does a business event happen to have an air show? If you're an air show person, does an air show happen to have a business event? But that's what you can do with local air shows. You can combine that as a chance not to show off just airplanes flying in the sky, but what you're doing as a local community in terms of your total aerospace business that you're doing there. And that was a great event, and I'm looking forward to the next one, whenever that's going to be, and working with the folks here to do that. And some of the other air shows throughout the state are going to head this direction, I think, as well, following your lead. So the challenge is to look at your community and aerospace in total, and to look at what that cluster could be. Is it just your county? If you have enough critical mass, it can be. For some more rural counties, it might be 2 or 3 counties together, or a region. But you have to have enough to reach that critical mass in terms of the sectors I talked about: manufacturing, MRO, air transportation. You can use your airport as a focal point of development for that aerospace cluster, because you have places to meet, people know where it is, and it's a place where businesses may like to locate. It's good to develop a diverse mix of aerospace businesses, not just in one area, because as we saw at the state level with the economic downturn, having a lot of different kinds of businesses in our state. We didn't take the hit Kansas did and Wichita did in 2008. They're still recovering from that. They lost thousands and thousands of aerospace jobs there because they were focused on general aviation and the manufacturing side. We didn't see that because we had a diverse industry. When there was a downturn in one area, our employees moved to the other areas that needed folks, and we were able to weather the storm much better as a state. And the bottom line is, whatever direction you go in, we're here to help you and partner with you, help engage state resources. So I'm open to any questions at this point.
Steve, I appreciate so much you're coming all the way from Macon. I'm sure your wife would rather you be home for dinner. You had a slide there, 51 billion of revenue, one of your first slides.
Yeah. Well, economic impact.
Economic, that was state revenue. We're Paulding County. How much would well, we're one of 159 counties. What's the effect on those counties that have economic development aerospace?
Unfortunately, in the 2011 study, we didn't break it down to the county level. We're going to engage Georgia Tech this fall to re-up the study, take a deeper dive, and at least go to the regional level with that. I know that in Paulding County, there's a lot of folks that have worked with Lockheed Martin, your aerospace cluster, companies like Top Flight Aerospace, Westcom Engineering. You know, they're Westcom Engineering, they're in Paulding. I always love that. You do lots of work for the various companies, not just Lockheed, but companies globally. So that has a big impact. We're hoping to get a handle on what that real number is in the future.
And you don't have any slides that reflect the attraction of non-aerospace companies because you have a facility or an airport?
I don't focus on that because by the nature of our center, we're focused on the aerospace industry. Generally, the Department of Economic Development does see that as a positive for companies, because a lot of companies go down at Fulton County Airport. You have Coca-Cola has a whole fleet of aircraft there they use to travel all over the place. Go down to Thomasville, Flowers Industries, a big bakery. You can't get anywhere from Thomasville easily, so they have a fleet of 5 jets down there they use to travel all over. So airports are a great tool for communities for general economic development and having access of those industries to your community.
look at the first 50 that you have here, the top 50 companies. Is it number 8? Is that Meggitt?
Yeah,
Rockmart,
yes.
1,200. Can you tell me what they do?
That's a fantastic company.
there you go. Yeah, Meggitt used to be, a long time ago, that facility started as a Goodyear facility,
Okay.
making rubber, making blimps. Essentially, the Goodyear blimp
Yeah.
was made in Rockmart.
Yeah.
Now they make all kinds of different engineered fabrics, mostly fuel cells for aircraft, for the military and commercial folks, and they've branched out since then. So they're doing a lot of different work.
They were one of the top 10 subcontractors for Lockheed on that 22. I noticed you in that there.
In the top 50 that have them at number 8 with 1,200 employees. That's in Rockmart, is what I'm saying. I mean, in Rockmart. Well, so what?
You wouldn't even know
Can you
it
help
was
me
there, would you?
understand that?
Why Rockmart?
Yeah.
Boy, you'd have to go back and ask Goodyear back in 1936.
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting. That's,
The good news is that you have a facility that started out in the 1930s and is still there and growing. And that says a lot about
We haven't done a whole lot to build it either. but-
So as you travel around the state and you talk about aerospace, and airports can tend to have, let's just say, heated discussion in the community about what to do with it.
you're not unique.
Tell us a little bit about, our current situation where you may see the slides up here. We're looking at what type of board they have, the qualifications, the bonds. Do we have an authority? Do we have a department? Maybe you've seen this in other places. Maybe you can kind of just share some thoughts on what you've seen. And
I've been to communities where there's a great relationship and they are doing a lot with their airport. I've been to communities where there's a very dysfunctional relationship, I won't name names, not here, where they have an airport and they're not getting anywhere with it. I'd say roughly about a third of the airports in the state make money, a third are, they're on the borderline, and about a third don't make money. Those top third, the things that I see when I go in and talk to the community is that the airport authority, or whoever runs the airport, sometimes directly by the county, but most time authorities, the airport authority, the county government, and whatever municipal governments they are in sync with each other. They have a unified strategic plan on how they want to use the airport as an economic development tool, and they work very well together. Airport boards that I've talked to that seem to work very well are diverse. They have a mix of folks. They're not all general aviation pilots. They tend to have a mix of folks from the aviation industry, because the aviation industry is not uniform. There's pilots and engineers and manufacturers and lots of folks. So the ones that in my estimation, work very well have a diverse mix of aviation folks on the board, but also some non-aviation folks on the board, because the airport is part of the community. It is a community asset, not an aerospace community asset. So you have to have the aerospace community, the aviation community represented, but also folks from the community. So it's very important to have that diverse mix of folks on the board with some aviation experience, aviation and aerospace experience, and bring that to the table. And then other folks who have business and other experiences they can bring as well. Because the airport has to live in the community. They can't be isolated. The ones that are isolated, the board is all local pilots, they don't do as well as the ones that have that diverse mix and do integrate the growth.
In one of your slides, I believe you said that for every aerospace job creates
1.7 average for the state.
right in other industries. So is that other industries outside of aerospace, or?
Yeah, for every dollar that we make in industry, the economic impact folks, economic forecasters, they have various methods of doing this, and we have a very high. For every dollar that we spend for every job, there's another 1.7 jobs, be it at your local grocery store when that aerospace engineer goes down and buys bread, all the different places that service the airport, service the various companies, how those dollars spread out in the community. We have one of the higher ratios on that because aerospace is a relatively high-paying business. The average aerospace worker in the state of Georgia makes $75,000 a year, which is 50% higher than the average for the state. So that gives us a high multiplier.
And so with airports, what would be an airport that is about the size of, say, Holdings Airport as far as runway length, amount of property, that we could use as a good reference point to say this is what potentially could come into the future based off of having a mixed-use facility where you have general aviation, MRO.
I would say it's not so much runway length. We tend to, people call me up all the time, and other economic developers say, well, you know, what's the runway length for here? What's the runway? Well, as long as the runway's long enough for whatever airplane you want to land there, the rest of it doesn't really matter. It really matters what's around the airport. As I tell folks, you can only make so much money off of selling jet fuel or avgas to people who just happen to be passing through. You have to make your airport a destination. People have to have a reason to come to your airport. That can be you have corollary businesses that locate in the area and they use your airport as a transportation hub. It can be that you have aerospace, aviation businesses on the airport, like maintenance, repair, and overhaul, where people are bringing aircraft for maintenance or modification. So you have to figure out, again, it's not so much length, it's how do you make it a destination? And that has more to do with not that strip of concrete out there, but the community and what you have to offer, and what other businesses and what other things can you bring to the table. So I'm not trying to duck your question, but there's only, I think Blake probably knows better than me, but I was looking at the other day, I think there's only 10, you're in the top 10 runways in the state. I think that's right. Nod your head. Is that right? Yeah, in terms of length. So, you know, you're in the top 10 in the state already of the 104 in terms of length and your taxiways and all those things. But again, how do you differentiate yourself? Because you are in a competition. There are 103, let's take Hartsville off, 102 other airports that when prospects come to the state of Georgia and they're looking for, they say, well, we want property on an airport. There are 102 airports that raise their hands. And we at the state, we don't pick and choose. We gather the information up and we put it in front of the prospect and they look at it and say, well, I'd like to visit them, them, and them. So it's how you differentiate your destination. And a lot of times it's not the length of the runway. It's a lot of other factors, other businesses, because businesses aren't self-contained. They locate your airport, they want to know there's other businesses nearby that can support them, subcontractors, things like that, that they can use for their business. So again, it's making that airport a good destination for business to help draw out there. Not so much, once you got so much concrete, you're done, you're there.
Gotcha. How about proximity to Atlanta? How does that factor in as far as holding, working within the overall aerospace industry, what you all do?
Well, you have an advantage because Atlanta has a big workforce, especially a big aerospace workforce. Because like I said, I talked earlier about the company we were talking to earlier this week, and their mantra, workforce, workforce, workforce. Well, if you're way down South Georgia, workforce is an issue. In Metro Atlanta, you've got a lot of folks who have experience from Lockheed Martin, or live in the county, or maybe live next door to your county. You have Chattanooga Tech, right, in your community, and train people. You have Georgia Tech, the largest engineering school in the country, the largest aerospace engineering school in the country. Just got ranked the most preferred aerospace engineering school by industry. So, okay. So the advantage of your first advantage is workforce. Companies that you could bring here are going to have a good chance at being able to bring that workforce in that they need to be successful. Number two, transportation. Obviously, you have this nice 4-lane road out here, a lot of ways to bring people in and out. If you don't hit the closed roads, but you have good transportation. We have excellent logistics infrastructure here in the state, and all the other amenities. Quality of life comes up quite a bit for folks when you have, especially international companies that are looking to locate businesses. They're very interested in what quality of life is and where their people are going to live. Those things. So that's some of the key things. So again, again, how you can bring the other attributes of your community fair, be able to use the airport as an asset.
Does the Office of Economic Development, or I guess the Department of Economic Development, do they recommend, or on the connection to being a destination, what would your all's theories or thoughts be on commercial operations?
Well, commercial operations definitely brings economic impact. If you look at the chart we had about Savannah, let's go back, let's look at the numbers. If we looked at operations, Peachtree DeKalb Airport, very busy airport, over 140,000 operations per year, but predominantly general aviation and air taxi. They operate up to the size of Gulfstreams. The Gulfstream's the size of, the newest Gulfstreams are roughly the same weight and size as a 737. So they have lots of, and you see Savannah, only about 2/3 of the activity in terms of operations that they have there. But when we look at the economic impact of those two, you have Savannah Hilton Head at over $2 billion, and then Peachtree DeKalb down here at $200 million. Now, a lot of that difference is Gulfstream Aerospace, let's be honest, because they're building aircraft there. They have a lot, they have 8,000 people there. But commercial service is a part of that as well, because they have a big terminal, they have lots of service there, so there's a good number of people that are involved with that. So commercial service does bring economic impact, just like MRO does, just like manufacturing does. But in the end, it's, as a community, what your plan is, what your vision is for the airport, and align aerospace businesses around what you want to do with that. But you can't, it does bring economic impact.
I've got two questions real quick. Our charter is to review the code of ordinances for our airport authority and make recommendations. You mentioned that Macon and Ben Evans have lost their federal funding due to commercial operation. What can we do, or should we look at in our review of our code of ordinances to make sure that doesn't happen here? What happened with those two airfields?
Well,
What went wrong?
what we've had generally in the air transportation business over the last 20 years is we've had, not just in Georgia, but all over the United States, we've seen small to mid-sized communities lose their air service, especially when they're within a 2 to 3 hour driving distance from a major hub. When you've combined the issues of security and the amount of time it takes to get into the airport, go through security and do those things, people, the security is no different in small airports, you still got to go through and do those things. What we've seen at the Macons and Columbuses, and this is true in other states, people will simply drive from Macon to Hartsfield because it has much more service, much more frequency, and that's the one thing that drives airlines, is frequency. You have that frequency of service, no matter where it is what customers like. So you've seen small communities all over the United States lose their service because people will simply drive to the big hub airport and go there. And because of that small airlines, it had nothing to do really with federal funding. It's just the airlines made a financial decision, so you just don't have the traffic.
Well, that's why they lost it, I believe, if they didn't have enough traffic, so they didn't get their subsidy. It was some,
Where they had to have a certain amount of enplanements per year.
Yeah.
In order to continue to.
and they get major drop.
Yeah.
My second question is, we've been looking at different management styles for the commercialization when we get our Part 1 to 9. And Colonel Carmichael shared with me that we had some job predictions and stuff, and so I went back and looked at them. They said it was 1,500 to 2,000 jobs. So I went back and looked at these different airports, and the three airports that they used for this was Macon, Columbus, and I believe Augusta. And the three things that when I looked at those three things, I saw two major issues. They have military bases there to help support the military travel. plus they were operated by local governments. Then I looked at the state level, and excuse me for taking so long to get the question, but 8 of our 9 commercial airports in Georgia are operated by local governments. And then Blake made the statement, he says, I visualize our airport being like St. Pete Clearwater Airport. Well, I went and talked to them, and they're owned by local government, Pinellas County. So Monday, I got on the phone with some friends of mine who happened to be through the NTSB who sent me to the FAA. And the guy kind of laughed at me. He says, the vast majority of commercial airports are operated by local governments or government. And I said, why is that? He says, well, I'll send you our numbers on it. He says, but, he said, that's a given. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't realize there was a given. But I said, well, we're running about 90% of our airports in Georgia, commercial airports, are run by the local government. He said, well, it's going to be real close on the nation level. Now, from an economic development standpoint, here's the question. What difference does it make? If we were to have to make a decision to go with an airport department run by the local government, an airport authority controlled by the local government, and bottom line is they're both going to be controlled by the government because of funding.
I think it would be.
What would you say would be?
I think it would be similar to any governmental function that you have at a county or local level that you're looking at outsourcing versus insourcing. It comes down to dollars and cents in terms of and expertise. Sometimes you outsource various functions because you don't necessarily have that expertise, or you can't easily hire that expertise. Sometimes it comes down to dollars and cents, where you outsource it because company X says, we'll do this for you over a period of 10 years or 20 years or whatever the contract length is. And we'll do it for less money than what you've also already been doing it in governmental function. Federal government does that as well. They go through and insource and outsource, and they do that dollars and cents comparison.
I think even with that long explanation, I have a question.
But one of the things we talk about is air authority versus a county department. And I guess as you travel around the state, I mean, it seems like, is there more authorities than there are departments?
It varies. It varies. I don't have a hard number on how many. I can go from one county A, that'll be an authority. I'll go to the next county A, run by the department. More of the large ones are run by authorities.
Why?
Small ones tend to be run more by
It's
the
quite
county
the
government.
contrary. The large ones are run by local governments. Hartsville is owned by the city. of
Yes, I'm
Atlanta.
by the city of Atlanta.
And there again, 80 to 90% across the United States of the commercial airports are owned and operated by local government. It just floored me.
But could we go back to that, it was a certain time period? Because there are airport authorities. I mean, you do have the New York.
Well, the guy told me, he says airport authorities, he says, are primarily for the smaller general aviation airports. He says, whereas when they get larger, he says, they're more economically dependent on the funding that they have to have from the cities and stuff to manage, unless you're Hartsville and pay their own way. He says, as they grow, he says, into the commercial world, he says, that's when they go to and he's going to send me some data on this stuff, some real facts, but that just totally caught me off guard. I thought we might have some specialized case here in Georgia where we just accidentally had, 8 out of 9 were owned by local governments, but it's, there's got to be something in that management style of why there's that many airports in the United States that are run by local government. And I thought you might have some type of.
Other than the amount of funding it takes and the sources of this funding.
That was a key thing that he said, was just that, and Larry hit on this the other night about the efficiency. He says, if you're run by local government, he says, you can use your funding quicker. And I think we've been kind of looking at it from the other standpoint, that it would take longer. Yeah,
No,
go ahead now.
my point is that it would take longer. You create more of a government bureaucracy.
But that's what he's saying. He's saying that it's actually more efficient. And he also told me, and I should have known this, but the grants and the extra funding that you get from the FAA, what do you call those, Blake?
The
AIB grants?
Yeah, gratuities from that. There's no difference, there ain't no difference in whether it's a locally owned
Yeah.
or
We have-
airport authority. It's strictly.
Yeah, GDOT and Carol Comer work with all the various
Yeah,
entities.
it's like
that
Terry was saying,
control.
when you get your part 139, as long as you fill out all the checks, you're gonna get it. But as long as you fill out all the requirements, you're gonna get your grant and stuff.
Stephen John worked for Lockheed and was a project manager.
I was gonna ask you where you got your pass from.
Proudly served on the F-22 program.
I'll talk to you. about it.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
I think we appreciate you coming all the way up
Yes,
here.
thank you very
Well, I
much.
hope it gave you a level set of kind of the, I always like folks to know what the larger aerospace community looks like and kind of where you would fit in that community and kind of that lay of that land and what's going on. And so I hope that helped.
Yeah.
So, all right, thank you, appreciate it. Close up here. Just.
Wait till the lights off, Blake.
Right there.
All right, I think we hit the board pretty good. I think there was a good comment, though, about this, the airport actually is in Howard Maxwell District, right?
Yeah.
So I think that might be something to consider too, is the state route where the airport is located. Something to consider. And, so representative, state rep or state senator. And, I thought we'd spend a little bit of time with the authority and the county department and then open up for our citizen discussion. And then hold the rest off for the next meeting, so. Larry, you want to start with yours on the authority versus county department? General topic?
Sure. Well, as it stands right now, the airport authority has a direct line to the General Assembly and a dotted line to the Board of Commissioners. And the way it reads to me is that the airport authority is a separate entity that operates within the confines of both the state and the county at the same time. So, with that being said, they have the right to bond projects on their own. In this particular case, they don't have much of a credit rating, so they have to approach the Board of Commissioners to get backing on their bonds. Is that a correct statement?
Yes.
Okay. So, with that being said, my whole point is, if we put it underneath the airport, anytime that there's an increase or a project that has to be funded out here, either the county would have to find the money within its own coffers to pay for a project, or they would actually have to then issue a bond that would have to go up in front of the vote of the citizens every 2 years, which bogs down the system, which bogs down the ability to do economic development, which bogs down the system even more. When you have airports, when everybody wants to reference airports such as Savannah or Hartsfield-Jackson, they've already been established for decades. They are not startups that have just started within the past 5 to 10 years. So they've already made their revenue and can support themselves in such a manner that they have that ability. At this point, the airport doesn't have that ability. The county really doesn't even have the money in its coffers to pay for projects on its own, much like Cobb County has. And Cobb County does not have an airports authority, but they do actually have an airport department. But Cobb County does create enough revenue that they can actually support the airport at the same time. So my point is, at this point in time, you've got an authority that has the ability to bond on their own if need be. They don't necessarily need the Board of Commissioners, but it's more preferential. So they're autonomous in that standpoint. Secondly, the airport, everything you see out here is either through the IBA or it's through the airport's authority itself. So, and the airport, anything that you look at lease-wise is actually through the airport's authority. There's no guarantee that the property itself that's owned by the airport authority will be assumed by Paulding County government, nor do you assume that the contracts that have already been written with any of the businesses that are out here performing lease agreements will actually be assumed into that budget. In addition to, you already have the contract with Propeller Airports, which actually creates a even larger legality issue, because if the contract is not assumed by the Paulding County government vis-a-vis through the people, then the county itself is legally held to actually paying for the potential profits that Propeller Investments would have been due over a 40-year period. So you've created a situation where I don't think you really want to go down that road, but the airport authority on its own actually operates effectively as a stand. I think with all the recommendations that we've made, we all have a consensus on a vast majority of what we believe the airport's authority board should be. I think by changing up the board where the people are actually, I wouldn't say beholden to their nominating elected official, but they do have more of a tie to the county through their representative. In addition to, we also have the current system with the way bonds are presented to the Board of Commissioners. It's still a checks and balances. If the Board of Commissioners doesn't agree with a bonded project, then they don't have to sign off on it. So you've created a checks and balance at this point in time. I don't see any sense in throwing out the baby with the bathwater and starting over with a lot of unknowns that are out there by whereas right now we can simply change the makeup of the board, create more of a direct line to the citizens through their post representatives, in addition to maybe putting some other best practices out there as far as how communication goes with the citizens by stating that we need to have 30 days of public notice on any bonds, but it needs to be better addressed other than through the local register or the local paper, that it needs to be put out on other media sources and try to get involvement through that manner. So that's the reason why I'm not necessarily going with stripping the board.
So I think with that, sort of think of it as what are the pros and cons versus an authority versus department, what are the advantages and disadvantages to each side. Terry?
I agree with Larry. I guess I'll amplify that if we were starting from scratch today and trying to decide how we were going to have a governance, this is a conversation that I think would make sense to have. But we're starting 10 years down the road where we've already got an established runway. The deeds are in the name of the airport authority, not in the name of the county. And so what Larry said about the legalities of unwinding all of that and trying to transfer ownership from one form of governance to another, I think brings with it such risk that I personally wouldn't want to take that risk and what it might do to the future of the airport. So I feel pretty strongly that we should keep the form of government that we have now and focus on modifications that we can make to the makeup of the airport authority, not throwing out the airport authority altogether.
I don't really have any expertise in making a decision like this, but just looking at the progress that's been made with the airport authority versus Paulding County government, I would much lean toward the airport authority.
City?
I also would lean very much toward the airport authority. I believe with the recommendations that we have with each of the commissioners and each representative, Representative Hiram and Representative Dowse, I think that they will be able to well represent a vast majority of the people. I do think there's a nice set of checks and balances there. I do believe that, as you said, Terry, and I believe as you said, Larry, that we do need to do a better job. Maybe there does need to be some amendments made as to public notices. So, yeah, I just think it's just too great of an asset for Paulding County right now to upset the apple cart and totally restructure. We can try it this way, obviously, but if it doesn't work, then maybe the state legislators need to get involved, and maybe we can suggest an amendment, maybe a time period. But I do think the airport authority does need to stay in place.
I'm with the airport authority. I believe that you've got your checks and balances in place with the change in the makeup, if it falls, basically in one of those member makeups. You've got correlation back to the Board of Commissioners, which has it back to the constituents. I don't know if you could have a department, aviation department, to where you have 7 to 9 people, either on staff or on something that have the skill sets that you may well have in that, just being compensated at a department level. I think you've got more skill sets in the airport authority. And one point to what Larry was saying, I think that anything, as the airport grows, and let's say it becomes profitable, or has the funds in which to handle projects, if the project gets to the point to where they need to go for a bond issuance, I think at that point in time, it needs to get the approval from the BOC. I think that would be the dividing line of not being able to pull the legs out from under the management. But, okay, when it gets to a certain level, now we need to go, and now we have a better opportunity to communicate better to the community on what's happening. And then you have the elected officials making the decision based on their constituents and how we should be moving forward.
John?
I wonder if anybody wonders what I'm going to say. I think we ought to go with an airport department. For the very reason 80% of the other commercial operations in the United States was it's a proven management process. They transitioned from an airport authority to a airport and locally governed department. Terry had mentioned that he had some concerns about the political influences on how it would impact the airport. That's going to happen when you've got an authority, or if you've got, because we have to go to the Board of Commissioners to get the bonds approved. After talking to that gentleman this week, the efficiencies, why do we have to wait 2 years to get a bond approved?
Because you have to bring it up in front of the voters, and then it has to be placed on the ballot in order for them to vote.
All bonds have to be done? What happened to the one we just approved in
No, that's
less than 8 hours?
No, you don't have to, we don't have to do that through an authority.
No, I mean,
No, through the county.
through the county.
If you all were to raise a bond, would you not have to put it on the ballot to be voted on? Much like the T-SPLOS,
Yeah.
or the E-SPLOS.
All bonds have to be on the
But
ballot.
you're talking about like they did for the film studio?
No, it's, say the airport needed.
Well,
$2
they're also
million.
the IBA,
Any
so they
bond.
have their
Was
own
it any
bond
bond?
capabilities.
Any bond.
But if the county were to have done that, if the county were to.
County doesn't do that.
If the county didn't have the IBA,